tests, and we all struggle in even understanding what is a test. But Doug from Duluth, thank you. All right. And they lived happily ever after. Okay. So this is a really interesting Mishnah in that this is recounting the life of one individual, right? If we think about these three Mishnayos so far, we talk about the 10 utterances of creation, and we have 10 generations from Abraham to Noach, and then we've got kind of another from Adam to Noach, and then another 10 to Abraham. And so like we're talking about huge amounts of time. And then we get to Abraham, and now like everything's been distilled into just 10 tests. And now we're focusing really just on the 10 tests of this one person. So Asar Nisyonos Nisnasa Avram Avinu Alav Shalom Va'amad B'Kulam. So there were 10 tests that Abraham was tested with, and he overcame, he withstood all of them. Now, why did he have to have 10 tests? Right? That he would have, again, the same theme of kind of grading on a curve. So you have one test and you pass, so you get 1 gold star. You get 10 tests, right? You get 10 gold stars. That's a simple interpretation. There's a deeper interpretation that tests themselves are a way of connecting. So we're going to stop the share here. So one of the things I think that we've mentioned, at least at some point, the curse of one of the curses of the snake is that the snake now has to like eat from the dust of the ground, which I can't imagine it's fun to eat dust. But if you eat dirt, if that's like your food source, so then there's food everywhere, and it's not such a curse. So the rabbis understand that from God's perspective, God wanted nothing to do with the snake anymore, and so therefore said, I don't want to be in conversation. I don't want you coming asking for an allowance. I don't want, so I'm going to provide for you, but like, don't ever talk to me again. So the idea of being tested is really another way to say that God believes in us. The test is not for God. God knows what we're capable of. God knows who we are and what we're holding. Like any good teacher, Saul, right? You know who's going to pass and who's going to fail. Every so often you get a surprise that this person should have done better. This person, for sure cheated because how could they possibly have done so well? Just for those who are following, the West Point drama. Right. So the test is really for the individual to feel like, oh my gosh, there's a test. I really need to prepare. And such is life. Life is a series of tests, and we're here to try to prepare. I want to share with you one medrash on this. There were 10 tests of Abraham. There's a different, not all of the commentaries had the same 10. Some of them, I would say they all agree on some of them. Some agree on all, but they don't all agree on all. Nor do they agree on the order. So one of the tests, according to I think everybody, is the test of Lech Lecha, of leaving his house, leaving his homeland, his birthplace. There was a certain comfort of privilege of people knowing who you are and being part of community. And there's another test that everybody, I think, acknowledges as one of the 10, which is, of course, as Doug mentioned, the test of Akedas Yitzchak, of the sacrificing. Now, what's interesting is the word Lech Lecha there also appears. So there's this wild medrash, which I think is really insightful, that says there were 2 tests of the 10 with the words Lech Lecha. The medrash frames it as the first and the last. There are others that see that there might have been a few tests before the test of Lech Lecha. And there's some really interesting midrashim. But the medrash says that we're not sure which was more dear to God, the test of Lech Lecha, leave your house, or the test of Lech Lecha, sacrifice your son. Now, from our perspective, the medrash doesn't make any sense. How can you tell me relocating is anywhere near the test of God forbid, having to sacrifice a child? So the commentators discuss this at great depth. But one easy kind of way of understanding it is that we're all tested where we are, right? In kindergarten, we get tests, which are age appropriate, first grade, second grade, all the way up, through college, etc. And so for Abraham, towards the beginning of his journey, the task, the ask to like leave everything, your identity, the culture, and kind of follow blindly this God that you're the one who's starting the tradition of God, was something that was a huge ask. It was a sacrifice of everything he knew. By the time, 9 tests later, after he evolved and worked on himself and lived with this heightened sensitivity and awareness of God, so then he was on a level that the ask of the sacrifice of Isaac was a test of equal difficulty, because then he had been so intimate with God that he had so much faith in God. It was such clarity that really nothing was a test. Whatever God wanted him to do, he would do. It wasn't difficult. So the idea of a nace, the idea of a test, the Hebrew word is nace, is nisayon. The root of the word nisayon is nace. Nace means miracle. When we're tested by God, the whole system is miraculous, because it means that each one of us, with all of the complexities of who we are, the result of our unique life experiences, all the complexities of the environmental, of all the interpersonal, that God has orchestrated a moment for us to be tested. That's a miraculous thing, because it's not just for us once in our life. It's for us every moment of our life. And it's not just for us, but it's for 7 billion people. So there's a miraculous, being tested itself speaks to the miraculous nature of the system of this world that God has created. That each one of us, if we want, we can show up and be present and advance the cause, or if we want, we can tap out and be passive and not engage. The word nace for test also means miracle, but it also means banner. The banners that the flags that the different tribes had, it's known as a nace. And there's a way in which a miracle is kind of the calling card of God, right? How do we know who God is? From the miraculous way in which God has interacted, through the splitting of the sea and through the 10 plagues, that allows us to believe that God is really the master of this physical world. There's also a way in which we kind of get to, I was on a call today with a professor who deals with, at the University of Virginia on ritual, on creating ritual. That's like, she's an expert in creating new Jewish ritual. She's a rabbi doctor, a super lovely woman. And we were talking about allyship, because I was speaking to her about these different ways in which allyship requires some spiritual rituals or practices. And she uses this word called, that she talked about advertising, that allyship is a practice of advertising a certain worldview, whether it's a person holding up a sign that says Black Lives Matter, or it's a person who's holding up a sign that trans lives matter. Whatever it is, there's by being out as an ally, as being visible, there's a way in which you are promoting, and she said, advertising a certain concept, a certain idea. So Abraham was very much kind of in the persuasive, and almost like in sales. Did I ever tell you the story? It's a little bit relevant. It's a funny story. Rabbi Beryl Wine, you should live and be well. He's got to be in his mid-80s by now. When he retired 20 some years ago, maybe he's older already, he was a Rebbe mine in Israel. He's a historian. He's a really important thinker, modern Orthodox Jew, who now lives in Jerusalem and has probably published 50 books. And so he used to be the head of the RCA. The RCA is the Rabbinical Council of America. It's the largest group. He was a lawyer in Chicago. And he was like the vice president of the RCA, which is the largest group of Orthodox rabbis. And he flew in for a convention, and he's going to get a rent-a-car. This story probably takes place in the 80s, maybe take place in the 90s. And evidently in Chicago, or wherever the conference was, there was also a conference. So he gets to the to the counter of the rent-a-car, and the woman says, what's the name of the company? And so he says the RCA. Now RCA is also, or used to at least to be, like an electronics company. So she says, oh, that's so interesting, right? Because he presents as a rabbi. What division for the RCA do you work in? And so he responds, I'm in sales. Right, which is, right, he's a very, very funny, dry humor kind of guy. If you've never heard a lecture from him, he's fantastic. He actually took us on some tours when I was in yeshiva. He took us on some kind of historical tours of Israel. It's fascinating. Anyways, so Abraham was very much in sales. Abraham was very much in the profession of selling and mass, some sort of mass, I don't know great words for this, but he wanted to change the dominant culture. He wanted to mass produce the idea of monotheism. The Gemara talks about, and the Midrashim speak extensively, that he would invite people in, right? His tent had doors on all sides, social marketing. Yeah, he was an influencer, right? He's what we would call today as a social influencer. So so people would come, and he would come and try to find, guests to be able to provide food for them. And they would thank him and say, thank you so much for this delicious food. And he would say, why are you thanking me? I didn't create the cow. I didn't create the milk. I didn't really do anything. I assembled these raw ingredients. You have to create the source of all of these. You have to thank the source of all of these things. You have to thank God. So that's how, one of the ways in which he did it. So the test of Abraham was really a way in which, and these tests personally were really a way in which he was kind of like promoting this idea of there being a God in the world, and not just a God that is passive, like the God who created the world, right? Because that God, after the 6 days of creation, that's not a God that we relate with, right? There's every 7 days, with or without us, there's a Shabbos. The God that we relate to is the God who was with us in Egypt, the God who was there when we were enslaved and when we were oppressed and marginalized. So when he's going through these different moments in his life, the neighbors are throwing him a goodbye party, and he's saying, I don't understand, Avram, you've been here for generations. Why are you leaving? Well, because there's a God in the world, and God told me to leave, right? It was a way in which he was promoting the ideas of being able to be in relationship with God. Okay, let's open it up for questions and thoughts. Yes, Saul.
So, two things, I think. One is the tests.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mishnah reads that Abraham passed all the tests because he proved that in whatever actions he took, even when he was still Abram, he passed the tests. That includes going into Egypt and telling his wife she's his sister to the Pharaoh, so they all get cursed. And when he goes to the other monarchy and still passes her off as his sister after he just saw what happened over there, and he does it again, that's passing the test? Is that, and
yes, good question.
And if you say, well, Abram knew what his tests were because God said, do this. Oh, you did it. Good thing. But that now, since God doesn't speak to anybody, since he spoke to whatever his name was from the whirlwind, doesn't. So we don't know that what is particularly a test, and so we should assume everything is. And so every gay man who comes out of the closet is passing the test.
These are wonderful questions. Yeah, these are wonderful questions. I don't have great answers. How do we know what a test is? I would say that anything that's difficult, that's a struggle, that could go either way. So that's a choice, right? Is there a choice? There's a choice to stay in the closet. There's a choice to come out of the closet. I think as a rule, we can say it's good not to be in the closet. Like it's bad to be in the closet. But someone called me not that long ago, Orthodox family, the parents, parents called me, the three brothers, one of them's gay. And one of the brothers was engaged, not the gay brother, the brother, ultra Orthodox. And he went, so the family was like minor Orthodox. The boy who's gay, I don't know how observant he is anymore, but the one who's getting married is very ultra Orthodox. And the wedding was in 3 weeks. And the boy came out to the parents, and they were supportive, certainly like supportive enough. In that, like, we love you and we're not throwing you out, and we want what's best for you, supportive. And but he said, listen, I don't want to come to this wedding without first coming out to my brother, because I don't want to be part of his life if he's not going to be willing to be part of mine, and like I would like to know before the wedding. And so the parents said, listen, like, this is your brother's wedding, let's deal with this on the other side. So they called me up, and so the brother said, I'm not coming to the wedding until I come out to my brother. And right, in other words, until as a family, we tell my brother. So the parents called me and said, what are we supposed to do? We want to be supportive, but like the other side, we're afraid is going to break the shidduch, and like, why should one son's happiness, be at the expense of another son's happiness? So I said, let me speak to the boy. And as a rule, I don't think we should tell people to stay in the closet. I don't think that that's a sustainable, good model. But if we're thinking about relationship building, right? So then being in relationship is a function about being in relationship. And I spoke to this boy. I said, do you want to have a relationship with your brother? Like, is that a goal, or are you looking for a way to justify not being in a relationship with him? So he said, no, I want to be in a relationship with him. I said, okay. So what do you think will give you a better chance of being in a long-term relationship with him, right? Coming out to him before, right? And being very out at this wedding and dealing with the consequences of the anxiety that you're going to give him? Or after the week of Sheva Brachos saying, listen, I love you. I told mommy and Tati that I'm gay. I wanted to be in a relationship with you. I was afraid that this might have a negative influence on you. So I want you to know that I waited until after, but it's really important to me that we're going to be able to stay close. So I said, this is not about being gay, right? This is not about being gay. This is about, how do you want to prioritize, right? These choices. So I don't know that there's a right way, there's a wrong way. I certainly don't have the answers, but in terms of a perspective, I think every choice we make to one degree or another brings us either closer or further away to a more evolved, more ideal version of ourselves and community and relationships. So when we think about, each one of those questions that you had about Abraham, like that was a test. I think it's really difficult to know what a win looks like. What does a win look like? What's best case scenario? If we thought today about being the best version of ourselves at every moment in a 24-hour period, what would that look like? Is it so different from the way in which our day was yesterday? Would it be unrecognizably different? I think these are good things to think about, but practically speaking, we want to put in the most effort possible, but we all have a finite amount of energy. And it's almost, I had a Rabbi once said that, being wise isn't a function of choosing between things which are important and things which are not important. Being wise is a function of being able to prioritize between the things which are important and things which are more important. Right? Like we all have more things to do in our day than the day allows. So how do we kind of, so when we think about the test is often a function of, should I do this? Should I do that? Or should I not do these things? But I think it's really difficult to know because we don't get a report card. When my kids, get the report cards, I remember when I got a report card, it was never as good as I wanted it to be. It was often not as bad as I thought it could have been. But it was helpful in terms of you get feedback. And like you said, God doesn't speak to us in the same way. So we don't get like a daily report card from God. How did you do today? It would be really helpful. It would be really great if God could say, listen, these were the top 5 best things you did in the last 24 hours. Here were the least impressive 5 things. And like these things, could have gone either way. It would be super helpful. So what, in the absence of that, the best we can do is the best we can, which is to give this like an obsessive amount of thought and try not to go insane from it. I don't know. Yeah, Susan.
After yesterday's session, when I was talking to my creative writing husband, which I didn't know he was creative writing, and we have studied Torah together for many years, and he didn't remember this, but I do, and I wanted to ask you, and it kind of fits with what you just said. Yesterday, you said that Abraham had such a special soul, that Abraham was chosen by God. And I was really surprised. For some reason, I have spent, I thought, years thinking that Abraham made plenty of mistakes, did plenty of wrong things, as Saul mentioned about telling people about his wife, although I don't know what I would have done in that situation. But anyway,
you need to read my story.
All right. But anyway, the point is, I learned that Abraham made very many mistakes. He tried, but we all try. And that showed us that you didn't have to be special to be chosen by God to carry something out. And so each one of us had kind of the same opportunity to be chosen by God to carry out some mission of God. Is that close to what some people think?
Well, I think everything you said is true, and I don't think they're in contradiction. The Gemara says that each one of us is supposed to ask ourselves, when will my actions reach and achieve the actions of our ancestors? According to the Medrash in the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Kramer brings this down, that the first test is that when Abraham was born, evidently all of the necromancers and astronomers, astrologers, had, just like when Moses was born, there was some sort of like glitch in the system cosmically that even though they were killing, the boy babies and right? So there was like kind of this like recognition that somebody was born with this, unusual capacity, both by Moses and also by Abraham. There's a measure that says that Abraham had to kind of be in hiding for 13 years because all of these kind of like, I don't know, spirit folks were like, searching for him and wanted to kill him. So that speaks to the fact that there was this tremendous capacity and potential. And you're right that we all have a soul and we all have that kind of infinite potential. At the same time, absolutely, there was trial and error. A lot of it was experimental, as our own life is supposed to be. We try something, but negative data there is actually really helpful. It's not because we're bad people, we're consciously making the wrong choice. But that's the part of learning. Part of learning is we try something, and how do you know if you like this food or not? So you give it a shot, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. So that's not a failure. So I would say that for Abraham, like part of the evolution of people is right, and this is what it says in the we say it in, it's a verse in Proverbs, right? The tzaddik, the righteous person, falls 7 times and gets up. Shiva yipol tzaddik v'kom, and the righteous person falls 7 times and gets up. And the prophet says, tzaddik b'emunasa yichya, that the righteous one with their faith lives. And the Rebbe's, the Nesiv Shalom in particular, this is the son of a Rebbe, says that the faith the righteous needs to have is that you can fall 7 times and still be called righteous. It's like a secular thing that you fell, you failed, you're a loser. That's not a Jewish perspective. The Jewish perspective is, oh, you fell, why'd you fall? How can you get back up and not fall, right? It's a process of developing the ability, and this is it's a deep concept within kind of mystical Musar, that the evil inclination doesn't want us to fail the test. The evil inclination wants us to feel like a loser and a failure after the test so that we don't show up to take another test. And it's analogous to the snake in the Svarim, that it's not the bite of a snake that's problematic. It's the toxins that can be delivered through the bite that then have a negative effect afterwards. I can't imagine it's pleasant to be bit by a snake, even if it's not poisonous, right? But there's a difference between a poisonous and a non-venomous snake. So I think that's sometimes the work. I mean, I'm sure I told over this story, but I had a Rebbe who used to tell over this story. When he was in yeshiva, you weren't supposed to go to the movies. It was like a thing, like yeshiva boys didn't go to the movies. Now you don't have to go to the movies. Now you can't go to the movies. Anyways, 2 boys skipped the night Seder, the night learning, and they went to the movies. And they both felt really horrible about it. One boy said, okay, to himself, okay, but let me at least show up for evening prayers at 10 o'clock. And he showed up, and then the next morning went to Shacharis, and he continued with his life. The other boy felt so bad about going to the movies. I'm telling you, I'm impure. I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I don't belong in yeshiva. And that was it. So it's not in the action, it's in the response to the action. And I think what Abraham teaches us is that yes, these tests he passed, but it's that continuity of willing to throw yourself back into the fight, right? A person, you can imagine a person passed the tests and says like, pass the test, it's like, why are you testing me? I'm a winner. But like, I think part of like having 10 tests is a recognition that, you don't get to finish this, right? There's no way that you get to like cross the line. I'm now good and I can't go back. Like I'm a winner. That's also not a Jewish philosophy. To think that a person cannot make a mistake in the future, to think that absolves a person of consciousness. A person, right, in the morning we're talking about watchfulness. It doesn't make a difference if a person, we learned this in Pirkei Avot, right, that a person should never trust themselves, that there was a certain Kohen Gadol who was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years, right? He was the high priest on Yom Kippur for 80 years. And then he went astray. So I would say similar to my own experience with the report cards, they're never as good as I want them to be. They're also not as bad as they could be. When we think about, right, the tests, right, we should recognize that like we can put in effort, but we can't ever feel too bad about the choices we've made in the past. And we can't ever be too confident about, the way in which we're going to respond to these tests in the future. All right, friends. It's another great time in conversation, and we will continue, God willing, tomorrow, and we will continue with the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah speaks about also interesting wonders and and we'll try to give more time for conversation tomorrow for any loose ends for any of the teachings up until now. So stay warm, and looking forward to continuing tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.